is back on air, and this time he's talking about buying crypto. When a former US president starts discussing digital assets on national television, the conversation has changed. But what he said next made people around the world raise their eyebrows. In his own words, Trump joked that maybe America could pay off its $35 trillion debt with Bitcoin. It sounded bold, even exciting. But when you actually run the math behind it, something doesn't add up. In this video, we're going to look at those numbers, break down what they really mean, and explore why many believe XRP, not Bitcoin, is the true answer to global debt and financial stability. Before we get into the math, there's a viral clip that sparked this whole discussion. It started when a respected developer on the XRP ledger mentioned that if you own even one XRP, you technically hold 100 billionth of the potential wealth of the world. At first it sounds wild, but when you understand how Ripple's network is being used to connect global banking systems, it starts to make more sense. He explained that throughout history, every era of money, from gold coins to the petrodollar, had one reserve system that dominated trade. And now, as the world shifts toward digital value, there's only one realistic candidate to replace the dollar: XRP. It's a big claim, but it's one that keeps resurfacing among economists, investors, and even policymakers. So when Trump casually mentioned handing a little Bitcoin check to pay off national debt, the crypto world went into overdrive. Because if America ever uses digital assets for settlement, which one would it actually use? Let's walk through the numbers and see why that question might have only one logical answer. Let's talk about this statement that has the internet buzzing. Donald Trump recently said, maybe we'll pay off our $35 trillion debt with Bitcoin. At first, it sounds like a clever joke. But the truth is, when you sit down and actually do the math, you start to realize just how unrealistic that idea really is. And that's exactly what we're going to break down right now. So, here's the setup. The US government currently owes around $35 to $36 trillion in national debt. That's more than the entire GDP of the country. And Trump suggested maybe America could buy Bitcoin and use it to pay off this massive number. Sounds futuristic, right? But let's see how that would actually work. Let's start small. Suppose the US government decided to buy 1 million Bitcoin as part of its national reserve at today's price of around $103,000 per Bitcoin. That would cost about $103 billion. That's already an enormous amount of money. But here's the problem. Even after spending that, you've barely made a dent in $36 trillion worth of debt. It's like trying to fill an ocean with a garden hose. Now, let's assume that the US wants to hold those 1 million Bitcoins for a few years, then sell them later when the price goes up. How high would Bitcoin have to go for that plan to even make sense? That's where things start to look ridiculous, because to cover $36 trillion in debt using just that 1 million Bitcoin, each Bitcoin would need to be worth $36 million. Yes, you heard that right. $36 million per Bitcoin. That's not a typo. From today's price of roughly $13,000, that's a 360 times increase. In other words, the price of Bitcoin would need to jump so high that its total market cap, the combined value of all Bitcoins in existence, would hit $756 trillion. So now let's pause for a second and think about what that actually means. The total amount of fiat currency in the entire world, all US dollars, euros, yen, and every other major currency combined, adds up to about $50 trillion. So Trump's idea would require Bitcoin to hold more than 15 times the value of all the world's money. That's not just unrealistic. It's practically impossible with the amount of liquidity available today. And it's not just about math. Even from a technical perspective, Bitcoin isn't built for this. It's slow. It's expensive to move large amounts. The transaction throughput is limited, and the fees can spike during heavy network activity. Sure, Bitcoin works as a store of value like digital gold, but it's not designed to be a global payment network for governments and institutions to move trillions of dollars back and forth every single day. So even though Trump's comment made headlines and caught attention, the numbers simply don't support it. You can't pay off the national debt with Bitcoin because the world doesn't even have enough money to reach those prices. You would have to tokenize everything, every asset, every currency, every form of debt, and somehow funnel it all into Bitcoin. And even then, it still wouldn't cover that massive $36 trillion bill. That's why when people heard Trump's comment, the XRP community started talking again. Because while Bitcoin is great at being scarce, XRP was actually built to be useful, fast, efficient, and scalable. The XRP ledger can process thousands of transactions per second at a fraction of a cent. It's designed for exactly the kind of large-scale global transfers that the world's debt markets depend on. So, when we think about the future, digital money, tokenized assets, faster settlements, Bitcoin just doesn't fit the role that Trump described. But XRP, it might be the only digital asset that actually could. Now that we've seen how impossible it would be for Bitcoin to pay off the US debt, let's flip the perspective. What if Trump, instead of choosing Bitcoin, decided to use XRP? Because when you start crunching those numbers, things suddenly look a lot more realistic. XRP was designed for speed, liquidity, and real-world financial movement, not just for holding value and waiting for it to rise. That's why this comparison matters. So, let's start with the basics. The total supply of XRP is 100 billion tokens. Out of that, a large portion is still held by Ripple. About 37 billion XRP in escrow, locked and released in small portions every month. That leaves around 63 billion XRP circulating between exchanges, institutions, and retail holders. But here's the key point. A lot of that supply is sitting still. Some is lost, some is held long-term, and a significant amount is off the market entirely. So when we talk about real available liquidity, it's probably closer to 10 to 20% of the total supply that's actively moving right now. Now imagine this. If the XRP ledger were to become the backbone of tokenized finance, hosting CBDCs, stablecoins, digital bonds, and tokenized assets, it's not unrealistic to expect tens of trillions of dollars in value to flow across it. Let's take a conservative number. $50 trillion worth of tokenized assets being transferred, stored, or settled through the XRP ledger. That could happen over the next decade as traditional finance goes digital. Now here's where it gets exciting. If only 10% of XRP's total supply, that's 10 billion tokens, is circulating and handling that $50 trillion worth of liquidity, then the math becomes simple. Divide 50 trillion by 10 billion and you get a potential price of $5,000 per XRP. But that's not even the extreme case. If the available circulating supply drops further, say to 5 billion tokens, that number doubles. In that case, XRP could reach $10,000 per coin. And unlike Bitcoin's theoretical $756 trillion market cap, this projection is actually within reason. Here's why. The global bond market alone is worth more than $120 trillion. The equity markets are around $100 trillion. Add foreign exchange reserves, CBDCs, and cross-border settlements, and you're easily looking at 400 million, 500 trillion of total liquidity moving through financial systems. If XRP becomes the digital bridge asset that powers even a small fraction of that flow, say just 5%, well, you're already in the multi-trillion-dollar range for utility value alone. Now let's tie this back to Ripple. Ripple's entire business model is based on on-demand liquidity, ODL, using XRP to move value instantly between banks, institutions, and payment providers. When Ripple signs deals with major banks like those in Asia and the Middle East, they're not speculating on price. They're using XRP for real utility shave time, to save cost, and to increase speed. And every time that happens, demand for XRP liquidity rises, which over time supports higher prices. That's the major difference here. Bitcoin relies on speculation and scarcity to rise in value. XRP relies on real-world adoption. Every bank that uses it, every institution that builds on it, every central bank digital currency that integrates with it adds pressure to the demand side. It's a system that grows through usage, not hype. Now, some people might still ask, Could XRP really be used to pay off national debt or move trillions? The truth is, yes, not by printing money out of thin air, but by becoming the infrastructure through which that money moves. Ripple has already shown they can move 50 million in just 2 seconds for less than 30 cents. Scale that up, and suddenly you're looking at a network that can settle massive amounts of liquidity faster than anything else on Earth. This is why the conversation is shifting. Trump's Bitcoin idea might have sounded big, but it's XRP that actually fits the model of global payments and national scale settlement. The math supports it, the technology supports it, the institutions are already testing it, and that's why many believe that if a digital asset ever helps reset or restructure global debt, XRP will lead that change, not Bitcoin. Let's now talk about the part that most people overlook. The banks and financial giants quietly preparing for a new financial system. Because here's the truth. XRP's success doesn't depend on hype, social media trends, or crypto influencers. It depends on adoption by real financial institutions, the same banks, asset managers, and payment networks that move trillions of dollars every single day. So let's take a step back. When Ripple designed XRP and the XRP ledger, the goal wasn't to create just another cryptocurrency. The mission was to build a bridge, a universal layer for money that connects banks, governments, and financial systems all around the world. Ripple's technology allows banks to send money anywhere in seconds at almost zero cost while settling in real time. That's something the traditional banking system simply cannot do with SWIFT or outdated payment rails. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Some of the biggest names in finance have already been connected to Ripple in one way or another, either through partnerships, testing, or attending conferences like Ripple Swell. We're talking about JP Morgan, Bank of America, MasterCard, Citi, BlackRock CK, Fidelity, NASDAQ, and BNY Mellon. These aren't crypto startups. These are the pillars of the global financial system. They handle the world's largest flows of money. And when these players are sitting at the same table with Ripple, it's not a coincidence, it's preparation. Think about it this way. Ripple isn't trying to replace banks, it's trying to upgrade them. Instead of fighting the system, Ripple is integrating with it. That's why so many central banks are quietly exploring XRP as the bridge currency for their own digital currencies, the CBDCs. If every country launches its own digital dollar, UN or euro, they'll all need something to connect them. That's where XRP comes in. It becomes the translator of value between different national currencies. Now combine this with the global shift toward tokenization. In just a few years, we're going to see stocks, bonds, real estate, and even gold being tokenized and moved on blockchain networks. Big investment firms are already preparing for this. The World Economic Forum has estimated that over $800 trillion worth of assets could eventually exist in tokenized form. If even a small fraction of that ends up moving through the XRP ledger as tokenized assets, stable coins, or liquidity, the demand for XRP will skyrocket. Here's why. Every transaction on the XRP ledger requires a tiny amount of XRP as a fee. It's called a utility burn. A small piece of XRP is destroyed every time the network is used. Now imagine that on a global scale with trillions of dollars moving daily, that constant demand for XRP to process transactions, combined with a reducing supply, naturally creates scarcity and supports higher prices over time. And don't forget, your banks are not just observers in this system. They're becoming participants. Some are setting up pilot programs, others are testing XRP for instant cross-border settlements. And once regulation catches up, once the SEC officially settles its stance on XRP, the floodgates of institutional adoption will open wide. This is why many experts believe the groundwork is already being laid. Ripple's partnerships with governments, central banks, and payment providers are the building blocks of a new financial architecture. XRP isn't trying to compete with fiat money, it's positioning itself as the liquidity layer beneath it all. So when we talk about Trump's comments, the US debt and Bitcoin's limitations, it all comes back to one key idea. Who can actually handle the movement of global value? And right now, the only digital asset that fits both the technical and institutional requirements is XRP. The banks are watching, the governments are experimenting, the pieces are falling into place. XRP is quietly becoming the missing link between old money and the new digital world. Now that we've covered the math, the banks, and the global positioning of XRP, let's get into what really proves that this isn't just theory, it's already happening. Because when you start connecting the dots between Ripple's partnerships, XRP's network activity, and how the financial world is evolving, you can see that the groundwork for XRP's breakout moment has already been laid. Let's start with the real-world tests. Ripple's on-demand liquidity ODL service powered by XRP isn't an idea on paper. It's a working system used by financial companies in countries all over the world. We're talking about corridors between the US, Mexico, Japan, the Philippines, Singapore, Australia, and the Middle East. All of them moving money using XRP as a bridge asset. These are not retail transfers. These are institutional level payments moving millions in seconds, saving banks up to 70% in fees compared to the old SWIFT system. And it's not just small players. Major financial institutions have been involved, even if not all of them talk about it publicly yet. Companies like Tranglo, Noati, and People are already processing transactions using Ripple's system. Every one of those transactions adds to XRP's utility and liquidity footprint. The network is getting battle-tested in real financial conditions across multiple countries with real customers, and it's holding strong. Then there's the quiet but massive move happening in tokenization. Ripple's acquiring companies like Mako, a major digital asset custody platform, for nearly $250 million specifically to handle the safekeeping of tokenized assets and CBDCs. That's a long-term play because Ripple knows that the future of finance isn't just about moving money, it's about moving value. When banks, governments, and corporations tokenize their assets, they'll need a trusted, scalable network to handle that flow. And XRP Ledger is already one of the few blockchains capable of doing that efficiently. Now, let's connect that with something else, the IMF and BIS discussions. In multiple papers and reports, these global financial authorities have mentioned Ripple, XRP, and other efficient blockchain systems as potential solutions for cross-border settlements. They're not endorsing any one project yet, but when you see XRP being mentioned by name in publications about trust bridges, interoperability, and faster settlement layers, you know it's on the radar of the people shaping monetary policy. And then there's the market activity. Recently, large XRP wallets, the so-called whales, have been accumulating millions of XRP tokens. That's not retail speculation. And that's deep pocket investors, hedge funds, or institutions preparing for what's coming. When you see massive transactions moving between private wallets and exchanges, sometimes hundreds of millions of XRP in a single move, it's clear that accumulation is happening behind the scenes. Let's also not forget that XRP has already proven its efficiency. When Michael Arrington, founder of TechCrunch and early Ripple investor, moved $50 million using XRP in just 2 seconds, it cost him only 30. That kind of efficiency is unheard of in traditional finance. To move that same amount through a bank or SWIFT system could take days and cost thousands in fees. This single example shows exactly why financial institutions will have no choice but to adopt better technology when it becomes mainstream. This is why more and more people are waking up to the reality that XRP is not a speculative meme coin. It's infrastructure. It's the rails on which the next generation of finance is being built. Every partnership, every integration, every test case, it's part of a quiet revolution that's already in motion. We're at a point now where governments are realizing that blockchain isn't going away, and they need systems that are compliant, scalable, and interoperable. Ripple's technology fits that bill perfectly. When the regulatory clouds finally clear, the world won't need to decide whether to use XRP. It will already be in position, ready to handle the flow of trillions, so the signs are all there. Adoption, infrastructure, utility, and trust. The stage is set. XRP's time isn't coming someday, it's coming soon. Now that we've seen how XRP's foundation is already set, the partnerships, the technology, the adoption, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. What could actually trigger XRP's breakout moment? What's the spark that turns all this preparation into a full-scale financial revolution? Because make no mistake, everything we've talked about so far is set up. The next phase is activation. Let's start with the most obvious catalyst: global regulation clarity. For years, the crypto market has been trapped in uncertainty, especially in the United States. But with Ripple's near complete victory over the SEC, the narrative is changing fast. That lawsuit wasn't just about one company. It was about setting the legal precedent for how digital assets are classified. Once that clarity becomes global, once countries align around recognizing XRP as a digital commodity or payment token, the hesitation from major banks and funds disappears overnight. That's when you'll start seeing real institutional money pour in. Not just retail investors chasing hype, but government contracts, banking integrations, and corporate payment infrastructure. This is the moment the world shifts from what is XRP to how fast can we implement it. The second major trigger, the collapse or transformation of the old system. Look around. Central banks are creating digital currencies. Inflation is eating away at traditional fiat and debt is spiraling globally. When pressure builds up in legacy systems, innovation doesn't just become attractive, it becomes necessary. XRP's strength lies exactly there. It offers a faster, cheaper, more reliable way to settle transactions across borders and between currencies. When governments or major financial networks finally admit that the existing systems are broken, XRP will be one of the few ready-made solutions. And then there's tokenization, the trillion-dollar wave that's coming, whether people believe it or not. Every major financial institution, and from BlackRock CK to JP Morgan, is preparing for tokenized assets. Stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities, all of it will exist on blockchain rails in the future. The question is, which rails will they use? XRP Ledger already supports tokenization with native efficiency. It can issue stablecoins, CBDCs, and wrapped assets directly on-chain, all without high gas fees or delays. Once major players start tokenizing trillions in assets, they'll need a global settlement bridge. That's XRP's lane. Next, let's talk about global liquidity reshuffling. When banks, governments, and corporations start holding digital assets as part of their reserves, XRP stands out for its liquidity and compliance potential. Unlike anonymous or unstable tokens, XRP has the structure and regulatory framework that institutional players need. A central bank or financial institution could easily adopt XRP as a liquidity buffer, similar to how they hold gold or foreign reserves today. Once even a handful of countries do this, the domino effect will be unstoppable. But here's the most underrated catalyst: public awareness catching up to institutional progress. Right now, most people still see XRP as that coin that fought the SEC. But in reality, it's been building one of the most advanced financial ecosystems in the world. When people finally realize that XRP is already being used, not hypothetically, but in real financial corridors, confidence will surge. It's like the early days of the internet when no one saw how big it could become until suddenly it was everywhere. And once retail investors, banks, and even governments all see the same picture, a world connected through real-time liquidity and blockchain infrastructure, the demand for XRP will explode faster than anyone expects. That's when price movement will reflect true adoption instead of speculation. The timing, no one can say for sure. But when regulation meets necessity and technology meets readiness, that's when global financial transformation happens almost overnight. So yes, Trump's comments about crypto may sound bold, but whether he knows it or not, the foundation for his vision already exists. Not in Bitcoin, but in XRP, a system that's fast, efficient, transparent, and built for real global use. That's the bigger picture, and it's already in motion.